was a star. She was a star from the time she was 2 years old. She'd be entertaining on the bus.
There's a photograph taken backstage at the London Palladium on July 27, 1974. She is laughing. 2 days later, a housekeeper would unlock a bedroom door at 9 Curzon Place in Mayfair and find her exactly where she had fallen asleep and never woken up. She was 32 years old. She had just completed the greatest 2 weeks of her professional life, and the story the world would tell about how she died was going to be a fabrication, built deliberately around the one wound that had never fully closed. Her name was Ellen Naomi Cohen. You know her as Mama Cass. And before this is over, you are going to understand exactly how much that name both gave her and cost her. Start not at the beginning, but at the room where everything was decided. Not a concert hall, a living room in Baltimore, Maryland, 1941. Philip and Bess Cohen did not play instruments professionally. They did something more total than that. They filled their home with opera records the way other families filled theirs with conversation. Sound was the architecture of that household, and the daughter growing up inside it was being constructed by what she heard long before she understood that construction was happening. Ellen was the firstborn, smart in ways that made teachers take notice, funny in a way that was not performance, not yet, but instinct. Magnetically present from the earliest age, in a manner that the people who knew her as a child would still be reaching for words to describe 30 years later. There was something in her that refused containment, a quality that announced itself immediately and completely to every room she entered. Around the age of 7, something shifted. Her sister Leah arrived, and with the displacement that only a firstborn truly understands, the wait began. She would trace it later, through years of adult therapy, to the anxiety of suddenly sharing the center of a world she had previously occupied alone. Post-war America had rigid and punishing ideas about what a woman's body was permitted to look like. Ellen Cohen's body did not comply. She was a child when she first learned that the world would process that before it processed anything else about her. So, she built the armor. She became funnier, warmer, more indispensable to every room she occupied. She developed, through the particular precision that necessity creates, the skill of converting private pain into public performance. The humor looked like the whole story. It was actually a door she kept shut so that no one would notice there was a room behind it. She attended Forest Park High School in Baltimore, enrolled at American University in Washington to study theater. She was assembling a performer's complete set of tools: timing, presence, the ability to direct an audience's attention toward exactly what she chose, and beneath all of it, a voice she had not yet given full permission to be what it actually was. She left American University without completing her degree and went to New York, because in the early 1960s, New York was the only honest answer for someone serious. Greenwich Village was electric with the folk revival, American musical tradition colliding with civil rights urgency, and a generation with instruments and something urgent to say through them. It was precisely the world that a girl raised on opera records in Baltimore had been built for without knowing it. She arrived carrying 2 things that mattered: a voice of genuine and startling range, and a personality that made people want to remain near her. She waitressed, she auditioned, she kept herself positioned inside the world she intended to inhabit. In 1962, she tried for a role in a Broadway musical called I Can Get It For You Wholesale, the part of Miss Marmelstein. The part went instead to a young woman with no Broadway credits named Barbra Streisand, who was about to become one of the most consequential voices of the century. Ellen Cohen was already being passed over for the women who would define the decade. It was never a question of talent. It was never that. She turned toward music and found in it something theater had not fully delivered. The connection between her voice and a live audience was more direct, more electric, more honest than anything a written script could produce. People who encountered her for the first time in the village clubs described it the same way across decades. It stopped you. You arrived expecting a folk singer and encountered something that exceeded the category entirely. Through the folk circuit, she co-founded the Big Three in 1963 alongside Tim Rose and guitarist James Hendrix. The group appeared on The Tonight Show, real exposure. She also married Hendrix that year, a union built on musical kinship and shared ambition that would be annulled in 1968. But the marriage left her something that lasted. She took his surname, joined it to the Cass she had already adopted in place of Ellen, added Elliot, and the name that would carry the rest of her life was assembled. The Big Three became something else. Personnel moved. She found herself in a group called the Mugwumps, which included a Canadian singer from Halifax, Nova Scotia named Denny Doherty, and for a brief stretch, Zal Yanofsky and John Sebastian, both future co-founders of The Lovin' Spoonful. The Mugwumps did not survive commercially, but they were the intersection where the road that mattered most in her life began. Denny Doherty. You need to hold this name and understand what it meant. Warm, charming, possessed of a tenor voice of real and documented beauty, physically magnetic in a way that photographs confirm without requiring any elaboration. And Cass Elliot loved him completely. She said so across decades of interviews, without self-pity, without performance, with the specific directness that was the truest thing about her. She said he was the person, the one. He could not return that love in the form she needed, though he cared for her genuinely in other ways. That gap between what she felt and what she could receive was one of the organizing griefs of her entire adult life. She had to carry it every single day and still walk out onto stages and perform joy. And she did, for years. John Phillips, who would become the creative spine of the Mamas and the Papas, said plainly that Cass had followed Denny across New York because she loved him so completely, that she had taken waitress shifts at the bars where he performed just to be in the same room. Phillips said it without cruelty, but without softening it either. She was devoted. It was not reciprocated. When Phillips and his wife, Michelle Gilliam, began shaping what would become the Mamas and the Papas alongside Denny, the original plan was a trio: John, Michelle, Denny. Cass was present because Cass arranged to be present. She had placed herself in the Virgin Islands where rehearsals were happening through a combination of determination and geography. She kept showing up. There was nowhere else she needed to be. The story of how she was formally included has grown into mythology. A pipe fell during rehearsals and struck her on the head. Whether that moment is precisely accurate or has acquired the particular glow of stories that become legend is debated. What is not debated is what followed. Her voice, after that period, reached registers it had not been reaching before. The full contralto range that would become her defining instrument was suddenly and entirely present. Phillips still reportedly said she was too large to be in the group. Denny Doherty and the undeniable sonic reality of what her voice contributed persuaded him otherwise. The Mamas and the Papas became four. The person Phillips had initially rejected became the voice that audiences responded to most immediately and most completely. California Dreaming reached the American public in the winter of 1966 and landed like something the culture had been quietly waiting for. The interlocking harmonies, the production by Lou Adler, four voices simultaneously individual and fused, folk rock at its most considered. The song reached number 4 on the pop charts. Monday Monday went to number 1. I Saw Her Again reached number 5. Within months, they were everywhere. The Monterey Pop Festival in June 1967, the same stage that brought Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Otis Redding to mainstream America, and they were at the absolute center of it all. Inside the group, Cass was simultaneously indispensable and contained. Her contralto was what gave the recordings their emotional mass. When listeners heard the mamas and the papas and felt something shift inside them, they were responding to what her voice was doing. But John Phillips controlled the group's visual presentation, and that control extended to how each member was shown to the world. Cass was wrapped in caftans and flowing robes. Michelle Phillips wore the fashions of the era. The hierarchy was communicated clearly across years of album covers and press photographs, and it landed somewhere inside her and stayed. She was doing all of this while sharing a workspace daily with the man she loved who did not love her back, watching him carry on an affair with Michelle Phillips, the wife of the group's creative director. This was not ordinary workplace difficulty. This was sustained exposure to the thing she needed most and could not have, performing warmth and happiness for cameras and crowds while managing a private reality that had no resolution available to it. In April 1967, she had her daughter, Owen Vanessa Elliot. The father was never publicly identified, and Owen has preserved that privacy. What every person who saw them together confirmed required no elaboration. Cass's love for Owen was uncomplicated, in a way that the love in her life was not. Owen was the joy that needed no management. Owen was the center of everything that actually held. 5 studio albums across 3 years, the first 2 representing something specific and extraordinary in American popular music, assembled with a care that made the result sound effortless. The group dissolved in 1968, its internal weight finally making continuation impossible. For Cass, that ending was simultaneously a loss and a door opening. The group had given her the name Mama Cass and the audiences who loved it. She had always wanted more than what the name contained. Now she could find out who she actually was without it. Dream a Little Dream of Me became the document against which everything else in her solo career would be measured. Her voice on that recording is warm and melancholy and so fully present that it sounds like a confession rather than a performance. The song had existed before her in other interpretations. None of them owned it the way she did. Through the late 1960s and into the 1970s, she built a television presence that extended far beyond the pop world she had come from. Talk shows, variety programs, Hollywood squares, primetime specials. Johnny Carson brought her back to The Tonight Show repeatedly because she was exactly the category of guest that hosts need. She made the host more effective. She made the audience genuinely glad to be there. She was always inside the moment, never merely executing what she had prepared. By 1971, she had made a decision. She was done being managed as a body. The group years had positioned her as the warm Earth Mother, the full-figured counterpoint to Michelle's conventional slenderness, valued for voice and humor, while the visual architecture organized itself around someone else. She wanted to be seen differently, as a woman who happened to sing, not as a personality defined by what she weighed. She dieted with an intensity that alarmed the people closest to her. The weight came off rapidly, and she emerged looking genuinely different from the woman the mamas and papas had photographed. The decision requires no judgment. She had spent her entire adult life being perceived through a lens she had not selected. She wanted to know what the world felt like without it. She had earned that. But crash dieting carries a cost the medical literature has never been ambiguous about. Rapid, repeated cycles of significant weight loss place severe stress on the cardiovascular system. Nutritional deficiencies compound that pressure. The years of loss, regain, and restriction had been accumulating damage on a heart already working under strain. She may not have fully understood the specific danger. The danger was real regardless, and it was growing. 5 solo albums, a sustained television presence, a successful previous engagement at the London Palladium already behind her, And in interviews from this period, she was beginning to close the distance between the public self and the private one, speaking more directly about the loneliness, the body image struggle, the years of therapy. That work was real. It was interrupted before it could be finished. The London Palladium engagement in July 1974 was the professional peak of everything she had built since the group dissolved. 2 weeks at one of the most prestigious venues in the world, the stage that had held Judy Garland, Frank Sinatra, the Beatles at their 1963 Royal Variety performance. To play the Palladium at that level was confirmation of something enduring. The shows were exceptional. Critics described her as a genuinely great entertainer who had moved beyond her origins and arrived somewhere more permanent. She performed with a full band, in excellent voice, and between songs she was funny with the specific gift that can make a concert hall feel like a conversation. Johnny Starr attended one of the performances and came backstage genuinely affected by what she had seen. Harry Nilsson, the songwriter of considerable stature in whose Mayfair flat she was staying, was present and enthusiastic throughout. She gave a newspaper interview during the run. She said she was genuinely happy with her career for the first time, that she had come through the difficult years and arrived on the other side as the artist she had always believed she could be. The recognition finally matched what she knew herself to be. It felt right because it finally was. Her last performance was July 27, 1974. She spent the evening of July 28th with friends, relaxed, content in the specific way of someone who has just finished something they are genuinely proud of. On the morning of July 29, 1974, she was found in her bedroom. She was 32 years old. Pathologist Keith Simpson conducted the autopsy. The cause of death was heart failure, specifically fatty myocardial degeneration, the clinical term for the accumulated cardiac damage that years of obesity and crash dieting can produce. There was no food in her airway. A ham sandwich near the bed had not been touched. The story that she choked on it was absent from the autopsy findings because it did not occur. The ham sandwich story originated with her manager, Alan Carr. This has been confirmed by Owen Elliott Kugel and by Cass's close friend Sue Cameron of The Hollywood Reporter. Why Carr introduced it has no definitive answer. What is documented is that it spread immediately, persisted for decades, and was constructed specifically around the dimension of her life that had been most visible and most savagely caricatured throughout it. It was an invented story. It tells something deeply unflattering about the person who created it and the culture that chose to believe it over the truth. Owen Elliott Kugel has devoted a substantial portion of her adult life to correcting it. She has stated clearly and repeatedly that the story was false, that it was manufactured, and that it reduced her mother's death to a punchline aimed precisely at the thing that caused her mother the most pain while she was alive. The correction is on record. The story has not entirely disappeared. To understand her fully requires holding two simultaneous truths without letting either erase the other. She was genuinely happy in specific dimensions of her life, and she was also carrying things that happiness alone could not resolve. Both were real at the same time. The joy was not manufactured. Her love for Owen was total. Everyone who witnessed it confirmed that without prompting. Owen was the center. Everything else arranged itself around Owen the way the lives of devoted mothers actually organize themselves, not for display, just daily, practically, completely. She loved music as a calling rather than a career. She had loved it since she sat in her parents' Baltimore living room before she had language for what those opera records were doing to her. She loved the people she loved with a generosity that made them feel genuinely held. Her laugh, frequent, whole-bodied, was not armor. It came from somewhere real, and it was infectious in the specific way of people who have not lost access to that depth. The loneliness was also real. Romantic love remained consistently difficult to receive in the form she needed. Loving Denny Doherty completely while knowing the limitation of what he could return had been one of the foundational facts of her adulthood. It shaped her sense of herself as someone whose value was in what she gave rather than what she received. She understood the armor. She knew what it was protecting. She was doing the hard and specific work of dismantling the distance between the two versions of herself. That work was cut off at 32. Her brief second marriage to Baron Donald von Wiedemann in 1971 lasted only months. She said almost nothing about it publicly, which, from a woman of otherwise considerable candor, was itself a form of statement. Her body was more than a body image struggle. It was what every room reached for first before it had the chance to reach for anything else. It was what John Phillips cited when he initially refused to include her. It was what photographers and label executives and stylists managed around rather than accepted. It was the subject of 2 decades of self-deprecating humor that was armor first, comedy second. And it was what her manager reached for when constructing a false story about how she died. The armor had carried her all the way to July 1974, to the London Palladium, to the best professional run of her life. She was 32. She had accomplished everything she had set out to accomplish. She was standing at the exact point where the next and largest chapter was supposed to begin. The Mamas and the Papas entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1998. Owen accepted the honor on her mother's behalf, as she has accepted honors across the decades, doing publicly the work of maintaining a legacy that her mother was not alive to tend herself. The Hollywood Walk of Fame star came posthumously, the 2735th. Michelle Phillips, John Sebastian, Owen, and Cass's sister, Leah Kunkel, attended the ceremony. The people there described it as recognition that had arrived too late for someone whose voice had been the most essential element of one of the defining musical groups of her era. California Dreaming still plays, in films, in advertisements, in streaming rotations that keep certain recordings permanently alive because they have captured something that does not decay. Dream a Little Dream of Me still does exactly what it did the day she recorded it. It sounds like someone who knows precisely what a dream costs and decides to reach for it anyway. Her voice is still what identifies the Mamas and the Papas catalog, the thing that makes people stop when the first few bars arrive and recognize without any effort at all that voice. Ellen Naomi Cohen, born September 19, 1941 in Baltimore, Maryland, died July 29 in 1974 in a London flat, 2 days after the greatest professional triumph of her life, 32 years old. The smile was real. The warmth was real. The humor was elegant armor, the precise kind that only someone who has known genuine pain constructs with that level of craft. She was lonely. She loved someone who could not love her back in the way she needed. She lived inside a world with narrow ideas about women's bodies and no patience for deviation. She dieted in ways that quietly destroyed her heart. She died alone. She was also, in every way that genuinely counts, one of the most gifted and fully realized performers her generation produced. The voice was extraordinary. The intelligence behind it was real. The warmth it carried was never manufactured. Still singing.